We are back. Sam Sedar on the Majority Report. On the phone, Stephen Gilpin. He is the author of Trump U, the inside story of Trump University. Steve, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Greetings.
So Steve, about I guess it was a week or two ago now. I don't know. Time has. There was a $25 million settlement with the New York State Attorney General over lawsuits regarding Trump University. First, just give us a sense. What was this lawsuit about? And I know you're out here promoting the book now because the suit is over. But what was the suit about?
So the lawsuit was about basically students feeling that they were defrauded, and the advertisements of Donald Trump and his so-called Trump University school learned from the Donald Trump way. They felt that they were defrauded, and in a lot of cases they were. And that's what the lawsuit was about. And they agreed to a settlement of $25 million. The February 6th, one of the students actually had filed an appeal to the lawsuit that was a year ago, not even last November, right before the election. So what happened was they filed an appeal to it because the students didn't have a chance to opt out of the class action lawsuit. But what they wanted to do is sue individually. The courts on February 6th rejected the appeal, and the $25 million settlement was enforced.
I see. Okay. And so, all right. So give us a sense. What part did you play in this lawsuit?
I was the one who was subpoenaed multiple times. I was subpoenaed to testify under oath several times. Trump hired a lawyer to help me defend, or I had to go on my own to hire my own lawyers, which would have been astronomical for the years that the case took to take place throughout the court system. But I was subpoenaed, and I had to testify on behalf of the students and on behalf of the Trump University itself.
And so, what was why? I mean, what were you in a position to testify about?
Students I worked for. So a lot of the students, some way, somehow, would come through my channel. So if a student was disgruntled, they had a hotline put together. I was the Trump University, basically a instructor or professor, inside house representative. So you would actually call a hotline, and if you had a real estate transaction or a dispute, they would actually transfer you to me, and I'd be able to help you walk through the dispute and help you with the transactions, since I was the only one basically inside house at Trump University that was accredited. Everybody else was salespeople. They only had one house representative that actually knew real estate.
So wait a second. Okay, so you were basically a teacher. You say a professor. Like what? Why don't we start with this? What were you doing before you worked for Trump University?
I always been in real estate. I've been in real estate since the age of 18. I'm going to be 48 this year. So I've been in real estate. I owned a mortgage brokerage business, and I was a correspondent mortgage lender out of Florida, and I had 3,000 real estate agents working for me.
And so at what point were you recruited to work at Trump University, and why do you think they wanted to recruit you?
Well, it was interesting. I write about that in the book. Actually, the lady her name was Sandra. She had a British accent. She sounded like she was from London. I actually thought it was a joke when she called, because I was busy in a refinance boom back in right before the crash in 2006, 2005. I received a phone call from Sandra, and she wanted to interview me and bring me from Florida to New York to interview for Trump University. At the time, they didn't even mention the university, but to work for Trump. In the real estate, and my credentials and my background is what brought them to actually seek me out in Florida. So then I interviewed with them for about several days, actually it took. And I didn't even know what position I was interviewing for when I came up to New York for the interviews. And all I knew is that, the real estate business is about to crash. We're going into 2007, 2008. I'm interviewing for several days, for several hours, long hours. And all I'm being asked is different types of real estate questions about my credentials and what transactions I've done all throughout my life, and how long I've been in the real estate business, if I'm licensed, am I accredited, have I ever filed bankruptcy or anything like that. So that was the whole interview process, and it took about 6 days. Most of the things was during the interview, it was really bizarre for me because I didn't even know what I was interviewing. It was just, what's a purchase and sales contract clause? How do I break a purchase and sales contract? How do I, a lot of questions like that. So I was basically educating the people that were interviewing for me. And probably on the 5th or 6th day, I had to get back to Florida because of my mortgage company. I was running my own mortgage company business, and I had to get back to Florida. And I finally realized, these people don't know anything about real estate. They're looking for somebody who knows real estate. What is the job? And on the 5th or 6th day, they finally told me that Donald Trump has a education company called Trump University, and they need somebody to be their in-house advisor, coach, and mentor to their students on real estate.
And what was your reaction at that time?
Well, first thing I thought was, and I write about it in the book, because we were in a conference room. They submitted an offer across the table, and I write about it in the book about, it was an insult offer. And one of the things that they mentioned to me was Donald Trump's way to negotiation is if you submit the lowest ball offer first, and if you didn't insult the person, then you didn't do a good job at negotiations. Well, I was definitely insulted. I felt like they hit me with a dead fish. But anyway, yeah, so they finally told me what the job was about. We crossed the conference room table, which I write about in the book. They passed stickies back and forth, and that's when they told me, and they walked me through the system and what they wanted me to do and educate the students and be their in-house advisor, and that's what I ended up doing. It was just...
So they end up meeting your salary requirements.
They did. After several months, the insult offer was I accepted the offer, because the market was about to crash. I had to do something. I had to reinvent myself. And, I write about that in the book also, about reinventing yourself, because the market in Florida was about to crash. The subprimes in 2008, the second week of August 2008, the market crashed. Real estate was going downhill. And I knew in the indicators in the real estate market in Florida, you knew property values that were appraising, $400,000 or $500,000 one day, the very next day they were appraising for, 50% of what the value was the day before or the week before. So I knew I had to have a safe haven. And I thought, as everyone else did, I talked to my parents about it, and my parents said, Donald Trump, you got to go work for him. It's the highest, calling that you're going to have. It could make you your whole career. Not that I know that it was going to break my whole career.
Right. Okay. So you went to work for Donald Trump because you were jumping off basically a sinking ship in Florida real estate. What did you have during the course of did you have some questions about the nature of this educational outfit?
I really, at the beginning, when I did all the research, the way Trump University started out was great. They had professors, they had Professor Elder, they had some really top-notch advisors and mentors and teachers that really did have credentials in the real estate business. Professor Elder is in the real estate business. He's been in it, and he's an extremely brilliant man in real estate. So I didn't really question it at first because I looked at the people that were working for them already. It wasn't until later on when I started getting the complaints and the calls and the disruptions that I realized, they're switching from in-house real estate teachings with accredited people, legit people. They switched out the business model to high-pressured salespeople. And that's when things started to really go downhill with the high sales people, because they didn't know anything about real estate. They were there just to sell high-pressured sales. And that's what they did. They switched to that high-pressured sales team. Meanwhile, everybody else that was legit ended up leaving the company and coming back in, or leaving the company totally, or getting released from their jobs. And that's when things really started to happen and started to really go downhill, because they weren't qualifying these salespeople, and these salespeople, majority of them, they didn't have any real estate knowledge. And what they started doing is these I call them road shows, where you get this golden ticket and you go to this free event, and then you attend this one event, they upsell you into another event for $14.95. From that 1495 event, they upsell you to a 3-day event. From the 3-day event, from 1495, it's 5,000. So then they upsell you into a private package that ranged anywhere from 3,000 to 19,000 up to 35,000.
Wow. And so
the thing is, real estate people that were doing it, I called them sharks. I refer to them in the book as sharks. Some of them even changed their name today and moved out of the country and all because of what they've done with Trump University. One of them was James Harris there. I talk about him in chapter 8 of the book. And I talk about it throughout the book about the upselling and nobody qualifying these in-house or these outside sales consultants that were out there pitching the real Trump story and the Trump brand and the Trump message about real estate and how to become rich, how to become a millionaire. And that's what they were teaching. And they didn't really even know what they were teaching or talking about. And there was no compliance auditor to compliance these events. So whatever they
okay, so let me just stop you there. So when did that start happening? And when did you, I mean, at one point, you realize, like, wait a second, this the idea of all these sort of knowledgeable people, if it was legit at one point, it's now a mirage. All they're doing is they're going and basically just shoving people into these sort of empty vessels of paying money. What was your reaction at that point? Give me a sense of timeline. Where are we? Are we 6 months out, a year out from when you took the job?
It was a little bit more than a year out. So in 2007 to 2008 is when we really started seeing it. And the only reason where I started seeing it, because remember, I was in-house. I worked for the university. I was their in-house rep. Everyone else was a consultant outside in the sales world. I started realizing it when the phone calls came into the hotlines. And I write about that in the book, about one of the students in Arizona was taught there was a 3-day workshop. They were taught some illegal ways to do transactions on affidavits and how to file affidavits and titles and liens against people's properties that they didn't even own. And I received a phone call, and I referred to the person in the book by Sedar. And I talk about that in depth. I couldn't believe that the student who paid all this money received this information and this legal real estate advice from somebody who was just upselling them and told them how to do something illegally. So that was about 2008, 2009. And that's the only reason why I knew about it. And that's when I started bringing it to the owner's attentions. And Michael Sexton and everybody, I started bringing it to their attention, saying, you need to send somebody out to these live events that you're doing on these salespeople that are hired to do sales. You need to send somebody out to them, and you need to have a compliance auditor compliance them to see what they're actually teaching and what they're actually saying. Because some of the stuff, if it's true, coming in from the student on the hotline, it's illegal. It's plain out illegal.
So, okay. So who were the owners and what was their relationship to Trump?
So Trump owned the school. Trump University is owned by Donald Trump, our president. So he was the owner. He was in 94%, and then they had Michael Sexton was another 4% owner, and then a small stake was one of the other guys who I never even met or seen. He had a 2% stake. So
Michael Sexton was the operating. He was the small ownership, big operation operator.
You got it.
And did you ever meet Donald Trump? Did you ever deal with him? How much was he aware of what was going on?
Well, Donald Trump and Michael Sexton, now this is one of those things where going back to the attorneys training you, because if you didn't know the facts, you can't really state it. But I remember Michael Sexton coming up to us and talking about meeting with Donald Trump quarterly. He met with Donald Trump on a quarterly basis, either in his limo or he's driving, or up at Trump.org. He met with them on a quarterly basis. Now, one of the things I can't, since I heard it through third say, I always was forced to say I don't recall or I don't know of that fact. But I do remember them actually saying that, and that Michael Sexton actually met with them on a quarterly basis. So I think Donald Trump had to know what was going on throughout the whole time of the process, or at least informed.
And what do you?
He knew everything.
And what did this operator of the outfit know? I mean,
he was there he was there daily operations. He was there every day, so he ran the show, and it was his game.
And so You were the guy. You were the guy who was basically informing him, if he didn't already know, that your so-called teachers not only are not teaching anything, to the extent they're teaching anything, it's illegal.
Right. Yep. I remember he said, well, why don't you become the compliance auditor? I remember one of the meetings I had with him and April Newman and David Heibloom is you should become the compliance auditor. And I'm like, what? And they said, why don't you attend the free events and check them out before you start making comments and actually see what they're saying, and then give us back our feedback, send us emails about it. And I attended one of the free events, this 3-day workshop here in New York City, and that really backfired on me because I would get up there and try to correct. They put me live in front of the audience talking about real estate. They actually used it against my own way. Instead of doing the compliance auditing, I had actually got involved and actually speaking at the events. And my job wasn't to educate them at the events. My job was to educate them at the office when they called in or coach and mentoring them. But yeah, so I went to these live events, and I realized that the live event, the first one I attended, is they weren't really teaching anything about real estate. They give you little tidbits here and there and stuff. And anything that in the tidbits that they gave you, and I write about that in chapter 8 of the book, any little tidbits that they did give you weren't legit tidbits. It was just, from the playbook that they had at the school that they've written up, that's been talked about most of the time on the trial and the subpoenas about the playbook that they had. And you can see that all over the internet. They talk about, how to upsell and what, they're there for a reason. You need to upsell them. Is Donald Trump's the best? You need to upsell them. And that's really what it was. It was just an upsell into these high-paying packages that were $35,000.
Jeez. And so what was the annual revenue for years that you were there? Did you have access to that information?
We didn't have access to it, but when they were doing the settlement, that was one of the interesting things about the settlement. It had to be anywhere, my estimates are anywhere, because I did a PowerPoint presentation after the company had fallen, and I was one of the 3 last people there, because everyone else abandoned ship, and they all abandoned us. So I stayed there to honor my commitment to the students. I did a PowerPoint presentation to see if the company could be saved and continue on. Now, we would have to get an influx of cash from Mr. Trump himself. But the school could have been saved if we went back to the old ways of practicing and teaching and made it more legit back to where it was in the beginning. Now, it may not have been as profitable because you didn't have the sharks. You'd have to fire all the sharks, I called them. You'd have to fire all the sharks in the cells, the high-pressured cells that were teaching illegal stuff. You'd have to get rid of them. Yeah, the school could have been saved. I did a PowerPoint presentation on it. And also, we estimated anywhere that the school would bring in anywhere from 25 to $75 million.
And that would have been after they were getting reduced profits. So what was the annual revenue in the year before?
Well, that was throughout the whole time period. So that was all the way until 2010 when it officially closed its doors. Even though I was there, and I was being subpoenaed up until this past year. I was there until 2010, 2013. 2011 I think it was Christmas 2011 I finally left.
Okay, so I know you left in 2011, but you don't have a sense of what the annual revenue was, or did you say that was between 25 and 75 over the course
over the time period from Trump University onset to the end?
Okay, so
anywhere 55 to 75 million.
Annual revenue ranged, I guess, from close to like 8 or 9 million up to $25 million.
Right.
Wow, that's a lot of students. At anywhere from $5,000 to $35,000.
Towards the end, I had over 5,000 students myself. I was advising over 5,000 students, either through the hotline, through the coaching program, through the mentorship, in-field mentorship program, where I'd go out and help the student for 3 days. There was a lot.
How much did they have to pay for that? To have access to you? Yeah.
They paid anywhere. It depends on the program. It really did. So on the $300 program, they got an audio CD set or they got some books. The $3,000 program is they got this what I call the Empire City. It was a real estate game of education, and I would run the Empire City on behalf of the substitute teacher for Professor Eldred, and I would respond to questions on that side of it. The coaching program ranged from $3,000 to $6,000 to $12,000. Basically, they used to say I got paid $500 an hour, which was a big joke because I never did. But yeah, it was but it ranged all the way from a 3-day in-field mentorship with some courses and classes up to $36,000 per student.
So, and what were the costs here? I mean, I imagine the salespeople were highly commissioned. Do you have a sense of what their what?
When I first started off, they wanted me to move into the sales side of it, and anything I sold at the live events after 2011 and all, around that time, 2010, 2011, the very last year, because they had started sending me out to speak at these live events because of the, people actually would leave the audience. I'll give you an example, like in Canada, the speaker and the salesperson that was doing the live events, and it was a 3-day workshop in Canada, Vancouver, they didn't know Canadian terminology. And Michael Sexton came to me and said, we're losing the whole show. We have a lot invested in it. Can you learn Canadian terminology? You have 24 hours. I got to fly you to Canada. So I actually took over that event and that show in Canada. I took over several events and shows where the, people in the audience, they paid for it and they wanted refunds and stuff. So like the Melville in New York, the high-pressured salesperson, he also changed his name. I don't even know if he's doing real estate at all. Or if he was. In Melville, New York, I write about that in the book. He actually just told us, when I showed up to help him out with the event, there's no money to be made here. And my comment was, what do you mean money to be made? The students paid for something. They paid for an education. You got to teach them some education. Give them an education. And that one event, he was getting paid usually they got paid, the salespeople, 25%, up to 25%.
But they needed to upsell.
So if they sold $1 million, they got paid 25% of it.
Wow, and they need to upsell, and otherwise, there's no value in it for them at that point.
Exactly. No value in it. And if they didn't make the 25%, they never got back. Trump didn't bring them back. Michael Sexton, they were terminated.
Did you have a notion of like what the return on investment for students was? Like you had 5,000 students that you were in some way,
helping,
advising, helping. Did people make any money?
Yeah, no, some of them, and I have letters from students who were very successful. Real estate is a very hard business. I've been in the real estate business now 28 years or so. I'm still learning to this day, laws and terminology myself. And I'm an investor. I've flipped hundreds of properties. It's hard work. And, you have to, it's dedicated. It's not a 40-hour job week. It's, 100 hours. You got to be there on call. When tenants call me at nighttime in the middle of the night, the heat's not working. You got to go. It's work. It's a job.
Right.
And it is my job. And it's a lot of work. Now, some of them, retirees invested from IBM, some clients of mine in Connecticut, and some of them, absolutely. They made money. Absolutely. They're still in real estate. They're still doing flips and all that. They're making money. They got the education. But they're all themselves. And I put their students' testimony letters actually in the book from Connecticut, the husband and wife team. They're still doing work. They're still making money in real estate, but they'll be the first ones to tell you it's hard work.
Well, no, I'm not. No, I don't doubt that it's hard work. I guess my question is if you were overseeing 5,000 students, the law of averages would be like some are going to make money, some are going to get tools that allow them to make money in this. Even ones who didn't get tools from this are going to go out and get money. I'm just curious if was there any formalized process to sort of say like, hey, we've had 5,000 we have 5,000 members of our alumni. 2,000 of them, or 2,500 of them, or 3,000, 60% are still in the real estate business 2 years later. Do you have any data like that?
We never had those data. The only data that we had was we had a 96 approval rating on our live events, which was brought up throughout the court case.
What does that mean? Like when do people...
In other words, they attended this live event and this workshop, or they attended this commercial real estate investment or foreclosure investing retreat, they called them. It was a boot camp, basically. And you paid $5,000, you got 3 days, and you had some type of real estate experience and learning in your education. Those are the students, in order to proceed, they had to give feedback on the instructor who was teaching the class. Now, those instructors did have real estate knowledge. If you went and paid $5,000 for a commercial real estate retreat, you got an instructor that was a commercial real estate specialist. Or if you paid $5,000 for somebody who did foreclosure investing, sometimes you got that instructor who did foreclosure investing. Or sometimes you got an instructor who said they did foreclosure investing but couldn't prove it, which I thought was odd because my credentials, I had to prove
that
everything.
does seem odd. I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, in the moment, I've just done a 3-day seminar, and I rate my professor 96 out of 100, or my teacher, but
It was 1 out of 5. You gave him a score of 1 out of 5.
well, okay, so you give them a 4 or 5, but you don't know whether or not you're being taught stuff that's illegal or not, because you presumably don't know any of this, right? Like
Exactly. That was one of the things.
So the
Absolutely.
96 is really not is really just like, how did I respond to this weekend? Not like a year out, 6 months out, 2 years out, 3 years out, 4 years out, 5 years out. Did the information I learned there actually prove to be valuable in what supposedly the pursuit I was pursuing?
Right, absolutely. And they never followed up through it. Some of them they followed up because the students would come back in 2010, 2009. Some students actually gave feedback, and the one letter that I put in the book, and it's actually in the middle. I'll tell you right now what page it is. If you have the book in front of you, it is on page.
That's all right. I don't have it right in front of me in book form, but
It was in 2000. It was August 15, 2011. The student actually wrote in, and they followed up and how they were successful in real estate.
Okay. I mean, I would imagine out of at least 5, how many students do you think actually went through Trump University?
That was the question. I never really found out what was the bottom line. On the class action settlement, there's only 4,000 students being paid out if they have their receipts and proof that they have it. And they took the class because you have to submit that in order to be part of the settlement. But there's 4,000. On my records that I kept all these years, I had over 5,000. So we don't really know what the true number of students that came through.
Huh.
I don't think that somebody there has to have those records, but probably now they're destroyed.
I would imagine. So give me
Yeah.
a sense. I mean, what do you, when you look back on your time there, what is your feeling about it?
Well, the whole thing was I was dragged through the mud. And it was kind of odd because all the subpoenas, if you go to Google and you pull up my name, I was dragged through the mud everywhere about it. When I went afterwards, I wanted to go back to corporate America to work. And I remember interviewing, and this is one of the things, I had to write the book to clear my name because people would say, well, you're involved in that scam of Trump University. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I was an inside advisor. I worked for them and all that. Well, we can't hire you. Corporate America didn't want me. So I was forced to stay in the real estate business because that's, and then all of a sudden, Donald Trump is on CNN and the news networks and the stations and, across the news saying that he didn't know that none of the advisors didn't have real estate knowledge. And he didn't know. And he compared some of them to hamburger flippers. And I'm thinking to myself, this man knew who the in-house guy was. I remembered him listening to our conversations and stuff on the phones, on the hotlines, on podcasts that we did, on webinar series. He knew who we were inside. He knew who I was, I think. Even though he, in the book I write about, he was testifying on trial. He was in California, and with Eric Snyderman, he said, they mentioned 3 times Steve Gilpin. And he goes, I don't recall who he is if he was sitting in front of me. He did the same thing. I've noticed that on this, watched a thing about the Confidence Man. He did the same thing. He doesn't recall and all. And I'm thinking to myself, how could you not recall the man who brought in millions of dollars and saved your company and stayed to the very last end, the man you insulted right before he left, the man that you gave a referral to, your golfing buddy, when I went to work for him and all. It was like, how could you not recall? And I write about it in the book as, when he testifies and he says that 3 times, he could have helped us out, but he didn't.
Well, I mean, in the end, though, I'm curious as to what you're feeling when you look back. I mean, is this a period of time that you're proud of? Is it something that you have regrets about?
Thinking back, in the very beginning of Trump University, I was proud to be there. I was happy that I honored my commitment to the students that were dissatisfied. I even work with some students today. Everybody knows that anybody can call me or email me to ask questions. I'll help anybody get ahead in real estate because I really do real estate. That's my life calling. That's what I do. So I stayed because of my commitment. I'm going to honor my commitment. I love the education and the teaching side of it. And so I'm happy about that side and how I handled myself. I'm not happy about the way it turned out and the way that, they were defrauded and the way the employees were defrauded inside also. I write about it in the book, Michael Sexton coming up to us and saying, good night, guys, I'll see you tomorrow. Never saw him again.
Wow. Stephen Gilpin, author of Trump U, The Inside Story of Trump University. Thanks so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
No problem. It's great talking to you.